everyone. I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The Midnight Ride. It happened during one of those carefree summer nights back when I was still in high school. The air was warm. The sky was streaked with stars, and my friends and I had gathered around a fire at one of their houses. We had been laughing, sharing stories, and watching the flames dance under the darkening sky. Time slipped away from us, and before I knew it, the hour had grown late. I glanced at my phone and realized I needed to head home to beat the town's curfew, which kicked in at midnight. As I stood and brushed ash from my jeans, my friend Stacy approached and asked if I could give her a ride home. Normally her parents would pick her up, but I didn't hesitate to say yes. I had a bit of a crush on her at the time, and even though it was out of my way, I saw it as an opportunity to spend a little more time with her. We set off in my truck, just the two of us cruising through the quiet countryside, chatting lazily about school, music, and nothing in particular. Our town is rural, surrounded by long, winding roads with no streetlights and very few other cars out that late. The road ahead was bathed in darkness, interrupted only by the glow of my headlights. I wasn't paying as much attention as I should have been when I took a turn, and out of nowhere, a man burst into the road, flailing his arms. My heart jumped into my throat as I slammed the brakes. The truck lurched to a stop, barely missing him. I should have kept going. My instincts whispered that something felt wrong, but concern for another person took over, and I threw the truck into park and jumped out. The man looked disheveled and panicked. He rushed over, telling me that his car had broken down and his phone had died. He pleaded for a ride to the nearest gas station so he could call someone. I glanced around but saw no sign of his vehicle. It was pitch black out there, and aside from the beam of my headlights, there was nothing but shadow and silence. As he kept talking, another vehicle pulled up behind us, creeping unnervingly close to the rear of my truck. My eyes widened. It was then that I really took in the situation. This guy's story wasn't adding up, and now there was a second car involved. The man was still urging me to help him, his voice rising in urgency, but something inside me finally kicked in. I took a slow step backward, trying to act calm, and eased myself back into the driver's seat. I locked the doors, shifted into gear, and floored it. The man began shouting behind me, and the second car wasted no time before pulling out and following us. My pulse thundered in my ears as I focused on getting away. I couldn't risk taking Stacy straight home, not while we were being tailed. Thinking quickly, I made 4 right turns in a row. Something I'd heard would help shake anyone following you. After the 4th turn, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw nothing but empty road. I let out a long breath, the tension slowly draining from my shoulders. Eventually I dropped Stacy off safely and took the long way back to my house to avoid that stretch of road entirely. By the time I got home, it was well past curfew. I sat in the truck for a few minutes, just trying to calm my nerves. When I walked in, my parents were still awake and not too happy about the time. At breakfast the next morning I explained everything. My dad was furious, not because I was late, but because I had put myself and Stacy in danger. He told me in no uncertain terms that I should have trusted my gut and never gotten out of the truck. As I sat there with a knot of guilt tightening in my stomach, I knew he was right. I had made a dangerous mistake, and while we'd gotten lucky this time, it could have ended very differently. That night stayed with me, long after summer faded and school resumed. I couldn't stop replaying the details. The way the man stepped into the road, the second car that appeared too conveniently, the feeling of being hunted, even as I drove away. I never saw either of those men again, but every time I passed that stretch of road I would glance over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be standing in the darkness. I learned to trust my instincts, to never let politeness override a sense of danger, and I realized that sometimes the people who seem like they need help might be the ones you need to run from the most. Looking back now, I wonder what their plan was. Were they hoping to lure us out, rob us, or worse? I'll never know for sure, and I'm not sure I want to. But there was something in that man's eyes, A glint that wasn't desperation. It was calculation. He wasn't afraid or helpless. He was bait, and I had almost taken it. What if Stacy had been alone? What if I had let my guard down just a little more? The questions haunted me, lingering in the back of my mind whenever I heard stories of people disappearing in rural areas without a trace. Over time, I began to think of it not just as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder of how quickly a normal night can unravel. One moment you're driving a friend home after a bonfire, and the next, you're being hunted by strangers in the dark. It was a turning point, a loss of innocence, and the beginning of a much more cautious version of myself. I started keeping a flashlight in my glove box, a tire iron under my seat, and my doors locked at all times. I became the kind of person who always checked behind me, who always questioned the story, who learned the hard way that not everyone wants to be saved. Years later, I ran into Stacy at a grocery store. We exchanged small talk, reminisced briefly about high school, and before parting ways, she said, "Hey, I never forgot what you did that night. You got us out of there." A word stuck with me. I hadn't thought of myself as brave, just lucky, maybe a little foolish, but knowing that she remembered it too, that she had been just as scared, made it all the more real. We hadn't imagined it. It wasn't just a creepy story. It was something that happened, and it changed us. Now when I tell the story, I don't dress it up. I don't embellish or exaggerate. I tell it plainly, as a warning and a lesson. Trust your gut. Don't stop for strangers in the dark. Keep your doors locked. And if something feels wrong, it probably is. It's the kind of story that sounds like something from a horror movie. But it happened. And it could have happened to anyone. Story 2. The Creature by the Dam. I was just 14 when it happened. Not long after my family moved into my grandmother's neighborhood. Even though we had only been there a few weeks, the area wasn't unfamiliar to me. I'd spent countless weekends visiting her, and one of my favorite places was a small pond just past the next neighborhood over. It wasn't just any pond, it was quiet, serene, and the kind of place you could sit for hours with nothing but the sound of frogs and the occasional fish surfacing. The property belonged to one of my dad's friends, and he had a cozy house right on the edge of the water. There was a little wooden gazebo that jutted out over the pond, and behind that was a dam about 8 feet high. On the far side of that dam, a steep concrete slope led into a thick forest, disappearing into shadow and silence. I often fished there, sometimes alone, sometimes with my dog, Angel, a tiny but scrappy Jack Russell and Rat Terrier mix who had been by my side since I was 6. It was a Friday night in the dead of January, and I had gone to bed early with plans to rise before dawn and fish while the world was still asleep. Angel curled up beside me, already dreaming. But sleep didn't come easy for me that night. I tossed and turned, my thoughts wandering. Eventually I drifted off only to wake up again an hour later for no apparent reason. I checked my phone, 1:30 a.m. The room was cold and quiet, and a strange stillness had settled in the air, for reasons I can't explain even now. I decided to grab my fishing gear and go down to the pond right then. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was excitement. All I know is that I bundled up, poured some hot chocolate into a thermos, clipped Angel's leash, and we began walking down to the lake under the pale moonlight. The night was eerily foggy, but the moon was full and cast a faint silvery glow over everything. The air was sharp, biting, maybe 20 degrees Fahrenheit, but I hardly noticed. It was so quiet, no cars, no wind, no sounds but the crunch of frost under my boots. When we reached the gazebo, I set my gear down and poured myself a steaming cup. Angel curled up in her usual spot between the benches, and everything felt calm, peaceful even. I rigged up my fishing pole, set the reel so it would loudly click if anything tugged on the line, and cast it into the water. Then I leaned back against the bench, sipping from the thermos and watching the mist curl over the pond. I glanced around, admiring the quiet beauty of the night. To my left, houses stood dark and still. To my right, the dam rose like a silent giant. I turned my eyes back to the water, but something flickered in the corner of my vision, a movement, slow and deliberate. I shifted my gaze back to the dam, and there, near the base of it, something was crawling. It looked like a pale dog at first, moving low to the ground, sniffing as though tracking something. Curious but cautious, I instinctively picked up Angel's leash, worried she might bark and startle it. I didn't feel any fear at first. Not yet. But then the shape reached the base of the dam, and it stood up. Not like a dog, not like anything I'd seen before. It rose smoothly, almost too smoothly, onto two legs. It was no dog. My stomach sank as cold fear settled over me. I crouched beside the bench, wrapping Angel in my jacket to keep her calm. The thing hadn't seen us. I wanted to keep it that way. It stood there, scanning its surroundings. Then, as if gravity didn't matter, it leapt effortlessly onto the top of the 8-foot dam. No build-up, no struggle. Just up. And then it began to glow. Yes, glow. Its skin, deathly pale and almost translucent, began to emit a faint bluish-white light. I could see its veins pulsing beneath the surface, like dim rivers of moonlight. It turned slowly, and that's when I saw its face. It was short, maybe 3.5 feet tall, with spindly limbs and oversized joints. Its eyes were huge, glowing a sickly yellow-orange, and its mouth stretched wide across its face, full of small, jagged teeth. It looked almost curious. Almost. I held Angel tighter as my heart pounded. She hadn't seen it yet, but I could feel her muscles tensing. I kept perfectly still, but just then, my fishing reel began to click. Loud, piercing. A fish had taken the bait. The creature's head jerked toward the sound, eyes narrowing. I froze, holding my breath. But Angel had enough. She wriggled free from my arms and barked. Not just any bark, but a bark of sheer terror, like something primal inside her had woken up. The creature dropped to all fours, preparing to charge. In my panic, I tried to stand but slipped on the frosty floor, crashing onto my side. I looked up, expecting it to be barreling toward me, but instead, it let out the most disturbing sound I've ever heard. It was a scream, but not just a scream. It sounded like a woman shrieking in reverse, high-pitched, distorted, inhuman. The sound echoed through the trees, and then it was gone. In a blur of motion it leapt from the dam, sailing over the slope and vanishing into the woods below. I didn't wait. I grabbed Angel, cradled her against my chest, and ran. I didn't stop to collect my fishing gear. I didn't even look back. I ran all the way up the road, past the silent houses, up the hill to my home, where I collapsed inside the front door and locked every bolt behind me. I don't remember much after that. I must have passed out, because when I woke up the next day, it felt like the whole thing had been a dream, but it wasn't. When I returned to the gazebo later that afternoon, everything was still there. My pole, my tackle box, my thermos. I never told my parents right away. I didn't want them to think I was crazy. But the memory burned in my mind, refusing to fade. Weeks passed, and I avoided the pond. Months went by. Still, I couldn't forget what I had seen. Eventually, I told my parents. My dad looked skeptical, but my mom just listened quietly, her eyes wide. Years have passed since that night, but I still remember every detail, every flicker of movement, every glint in those alien eyes. I haven't been back to that dam after dark since. I still go fishing sometimes, but only during the day, and never alone. As for what I saw that night, I've read countless accounts of cryptids and creatures, tried to find anything similar. The closest I've found is something called a rake or maybe a glimmer man. But those are just stories. I lived mine. And I'll never forget the night something unnatural crawled out of the woods to remind me that we're not alone. Even now, sometimes I wake up at night and swear I hear that reversed scream, echoing faintly from the woods. Sometimes I dream about the creature, standing silently on the dam, glowing softly under the moonlight. I wonder what it was doing there, why it appeared that night. Was it just curious? Was it watching? Or was it waiting for something or someone? I don't know. And maybe I never will. But whatever it was, it saw me. It heard me. And for one long cold night, it stood no more than 40 feet away, real as anything I've ever known. Story 3. The apartment behind the funeral home. It's strange how quickly you can go from skeptical to believer when the unexplained happens to you firsthand. When I moved into the small apartment tucked behind a funeral home, I wasn't particularly nervous. If anything, I saw it as a practical opportunity. I was studying mortuary science, and the funeral home offered me a quiet, private place to live at low cost. It seemed perfect. My classes kept me busy during the day, and I spent my evenings assisting with services, embalming and day-to-day operations. The apartment was cozy, quiet, and set apart from the rest of the building, which gave me a sense of independence. But almost immediately after I moved in, things began to feel off. At first it was subtle, cold spots in certain rooms, the feeling of being watched, fleeting shadows in the corner of my vision. I chalked it all up to nerves and stress. That is, until the experiences grew too strong to ignore. It started with sounds, strange, soft ones. I'd be brushing my hair or getting ready for class, and I'd hear what sounded like footsteps just outside my door. At first, I thought it might be co-workers arriving early or staying late. But the timing never made sense, and every time I opened the door, no one was there. Then came the smells, old, musty scents that didn't belong in a freshly cleaned apartment, and the lights. The lights in the hallway just outside my door were motion activated, and sometimes they would flicker on in the middle of the night, when no one should be moving through that part of the building. One night, while brushing my hair in the bathroom, a co-worker texted me. She said she had a weird feeling and asked if I could go check the front doors of the funeral home, just to make sure they were locked. It sounded like a silly request, but something about her tone made me pause. I slipped on my shoes and stepped into the dark hallway, trusting the motion sensors to light my way. I made my way toward the lobby, passing through quiet, shadowed corridors filled with the lingering scent of lilies and polished wood. When I reached the front entrance, I discovered the doors were unlocked. That alone sent a chill down my spine. But it wasn't just the doors. It was the feeling that something was behind me, close but unseen. As I turned to walk back, a giggle echoed softly through the air. It was faint but unmistakable, the unmistakable sound of a little girl laughing. My skin broke out in goosebumps. I stood frozen, the laugh coming from behind one of the closed doors, only a few feet from where I was standing. I didn't wait to investigate. I hurried back to my apartment, heart pounding, locked the door behind me, and pressed my back to it, as if that might stop whatever was out there. Later that night, I shared what had happened with my co-worker. She admitted she had been feeling strange vibes in the building all day. That's when I realized I wasn't the only one experiencing these things. Over time, we all came to know there were at least 2 recurring spirits, or presences, lurking in the funeral home. One of them was a little girl no older than 8 or 9. She was seen only in flashes, a brief movement behind a door frame, a giggle in an empty hallway. The other was something much darker, a tall, shadowy man dressed in a long black coat and hat. He was silent, looming, and every time someone caught a glimpse of him, the air seemed to grow heavier, colder, more oppressive. I began noticing patterns. The little girl's giggle was always followed by knocking sounds or doors swinging open. The shadow man was different. When he appeared, it felt like dread had entered the room and refused to leave. I still remember the night I saw him myself. I had gone into the prep room to do laundry. That's where the washer and dryer were kept, right in the room where embalming took place. As I walked down the hallway, I heard a door creak behind me. When I turned around, I saw him. He was at the far end of the hallway, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in black from head to toe. For a split second, I thought it was my boss. But then he simply disappeared. He didn't turn a corner or walk away. He just vanished. The lights in the hallway stayed on, but the figure was gone. My breath caught in my throat. I turned on my heel and ran back to my apartment, locking the door behind me. I sat on the floor, my back pressed to the wall, unable to process what I had seen. I didn't tell anyone right away. I was afraid of sounding delusional, but the signs kept appearing. One morning I woke up and noticed my microwave clock had switched to military time. I didn't think much of it, until I realized my alarm clock had done the same thing, except it was battery operated. Small, unnerving things continued to happen. I'd hear whispers when I was alone, footsteps walking past my door, and sometimes my belongings would move. Once, I came home to find my keys missing from the kitchen table, only to discover them later under a heavy blanket on the couch. twisted, and bent in a way that suggested someone had tried to force them off the keyring. No one else had access to my apartment. That was the turning point for me, the moment I realized I needed to tell someone. I shared my experiences with an older co-worker who had been working at the funeral home for years. To my surprise, she didn't dismiss me. In fact, she had stories of her own. She had heard the little girl's laughter. She had seen the man in the hat. She described the same feelings of being watched, the same knocks and whispers. We compared stories and found they lined up more often than not. Other staff members quietly confirmed similar experiences. It was like we had all been silently collecting pieces of a puzzle, unsure if we were imagining it, but once we spoke out loud, it all fit together. The funeral home was haunted by what we didn't know, but the spirits weren't just passing through. They stayed. They watched. They listened. There was one particularly disturbing night when I was folding laundry in my bedroom. I heard it. A throat-clearing sound, like someone trying to get my attention from the living room. I froze. The voice had weight, presence. It wasn't subtle. I thought it might be someone who had walked in, maybe a co-worker or my boss, but when I peeked into the living room, no one was there. I checked the bathroom, every corner of the apartment, but it was empty, and I knew then that whatever this was, it wasn't going away. Still, life moved on. The spirits became a part of the place. Doors would open and close without warning. Lights would flicker. Occasionally, the TV would shut off on its own. And some nights when I had company over and told them the stories, those things would happen right in front of them. Eventually, the fear gave way to fascination. I stopped panicking when I heard the footsteps or the knocks. I started paying attention to the energy in each room. Some nights were calm, others weren't. It was as if the building breathed, sometimes in peace, sometimes in unrest. My guests often felt it too, and over time many became reluctant to visit. But for me, the spirits were part of my daily life. They hadn't harmed me, not yet, and I hoped that meant they didn't intend to. Still, I couldn't help but wonder what they wanted. If they were stuck, or watching, or simply existing in the spaces between our world and whatever lies beyond. Even now, I'm not sure what I believe. I only know what I've experienced. I know that the little girl's giggle was real. I know that the tall man in the hat wasn't a trick of the light. Something lingers in that funeral home. Something unseen but deeply felt. It watches from the corners, walks the halls at night, and sometimes, just sometimes, makes itself known in the quietest, most chilling ways, and I don't know if I'll ever understand why. Story 4. The Man in the Basement and the Barn. Some stories stick with you, not because they're terrifying in the usual sense, but because they quietly stretch the boundary of what you think is real. I was around 14 or 15 when the strange events in our house began to unfold. We had built the house ourselves 5 years earlier, in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by trees and winding country roads. Everything felt normal at first, just the typical life of a suburban teenager playing in a punk band and staying up too late with video games. But then I began to notice things, shadows that lingered longer than they should, fleeting shapes in the corners of rooms, and an odd chill that seemed to cling to the basement. It all started there, in that lower level of our home, the place where I practiced with my band, the place where we crashed after jam sessions, the place that began to feel watched. It wasn't just the shadows. I would walk into the basement at night, and there he would be, in the corner, silent and motionless, a tall figure, pale as paper, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned coat and a wide-brimmed black hat. Sometimes he held a lantern. He never spoke. He never moved. He just stood there, always with that same heavy, mournful expression etched into his pale face. And then, just like that, he'd disappear, fade out as if the air itself swallowed him. I told my mum. She believed me, at least partially. She had always been more open to the paranormal than most, but I never mentioned it to anyone else. Not until my friends saw him too. That was the moment everything changed. One night my drummer was sleeping over. We had stayed up late playing video games, the glow of the screen flickering in the basement's dim light. Eventually we passed out on opposite sides of the wraparound couch. Around 3 a.m. I woke up. The basement was quiet, too quiet. The back door was wide open. The lights were all on, and my friend was gone. My heart dropped. I called out, but there was no response. I searched the house. No sign of him. I noticed my flip phone had been moved, and when I checked the call log, there was a recent outgoing call to a number I didn't recognize. The next day, I confronted him, expecting a joke or excuse, but he was pale, shaken, almost angry. He told me he had seen the man, the tall one in the hat. Only this time, the man lunged at him. Terrified, my friend had grabbed my phone, run outside, and called his mum to come pick him up. He returned later just to leave my phone where I could find it, then ran without even closing the door behind him. That incident sparked whispers at school. People started saying my house was haunted. I didn't fight it. I didn't deny it, because it was true. And then, a few years later, something happened that still gives me chills. The elderly woman who lived across the street passed away. Her family came to clean out the property, including the large barn out back that had stood abandoned for years. They brought their daughter, a little girl around 6 or 7. As they entered the barn, she pointed toward a shadowy corner and described, without prompting, without any previous knowledge, the exact same man I had seen in my basement. She said he was standing there, just watching. She described his coat, his lantern, his hat. She had never met me. She had never been inside my house. And yet she saw him, the same presence that had haunted me for years. That was the last time I ever heard of anyone seeing him. After that, he was just gone. I sometimes wonder if he had been tied to that barn in some way, lingering near both properties, appearing to those who were sensitive enough to notice. I'll never know for sure, but the image of that little girl pointing into the corner of a cold, dark barn has never left me. There was something undeniably real about her words, something that made it clear this wasn't just imagination or fear. It was connection, through time, through space, through whatever thin wall separates our world from the next. I don't know what the man was. A ghost? A memory? A fragment of a life long gone? All I know is that we both saw him, myself, my friend, and that little girl. That's 3 people, different in age and belief, all describing the same thing. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I think about that basement. I haven't lived there in years, but the memory is still vivid. The cool concrete underfoot, the quiet hum of the furnace, and the shadow in the corner, watching, waiting, silent. He never spoke, never moved, but his presence filled the room like heavy smoke. You could feel him, pressing down on your chest, making every breath feel just a little harder to take. There's something unsettling about a ghost that doesn't chase you, doesn't scream or throw things. He just watches. That was the scariest part. The stillness, the certainty that you were not alone, that something ancient and unknowable had claimed that corner of the room, and you were merely a visitor in its domain. It wasn't evil. Exactly. It didn't feel malicious. It felt sad, as if it was mourning something long lost, staring through the years at a world that no longer belonged to it. I sometimes think that's the scariest kind of haunting, not one born of rage or violence, but one born of grief. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if we had tried to talk to him. Would he have answered? Would it have made things worse? Or would we have learned something about him, about ourselves, about what lies just beyond the veil? I'll never know, and maybe that's for the best. Some doors aren't meant to be opened, some shadows are better left undisturbed, but I still think of him, still dream of the basement and that quiet, pale figure standing in the corner with eyes that never blinked and a presence that never faded. And I wonder how many others have seen him, how many others have felt the weight of his gaze and known, without a doubt, that something watches from the dark. It's easy to dismiss these things as tricks of the mind, as fear playing games with the senses, but there are too many stories, too many coincidences, too many witnesses, unconnected, telling the same tale. Something lives in the spaces we don't understand. Something lingers where memories gather dust, and if you ever find yourself in a quiet basement, staring into a shadow that doesn't quite behave like the others, maybe take a moment, listen, wait, because sometimes the silence speaks loudest of all. Story 5. The visitors who knew too much. It was a quiet weekend night when it happened. One of those seemingly unremarkable evenings that lingers in your memory, not because of what it offered, but because of what it almost became. My sister and I were home alone. We were both teenagers at the time, small in stature and cautious by nature. Our mom, stepdad, and little brother had gone out to a party, and while we had the house to ourselves, we didn't feel particularly uneasy. We were used to the silence, used to entertaining ourselves with TV and snacks until they returned. I was in the living room, just a few feet from the front door, flipping through channels when there was a sudden knock. It was just a minute or two after the rest of the family had left, and I assumed, without thinking, that someone had forgotten something. I hurried to the door, not even checking the peephole, because I couldn't reach it without standing on tiptoes. I didn't think to glance through the blinds, either, because I didn't want whoever was outside to know I was hesitating. I simply opened the door. Standing there was a woman I didn't recognize. She looked to be in her early 20s, with dark hair and an unsettling presence that was hard to define. She wore black clothing and stood with a kind of rigid purpose, her voice quiet but firm as she asked whether a certain man lived there. The name didn't ring a bell. I told her no, that she must have the wrong house. She nodded, but something about her eyes felt cold. She kept glancing down at the screen door handle, almost like she was waiting for me to open it. I didn't. I watched her as she stepped away, walking slowly back into the driveway. There was a weak slice of moonlight spilling onto the concrete, and it barely illuminated her face as she stood there, talking on the phone with someone I couldn't see. She remained in the driveway long after the call ended, just staring at the house. My chest tightened with unease. I closed the door and locked it, then went to the other side of the house to peek out from behind the blinds where she wouldn't see me. She finally walked away, but instead of leaving, she crossed the street and stood 2 houses down, next to a car that hadn't been parked there before. I called my sister into the living room and told her everything. We sat together, trying to focus on the show again, but we couldn't. The air felt tense. It had only been about 15 minutes when there was another knock on the window. Before we could panic, we heard a familiar voice. It was our aunt. She had stopped by to return something and noticed the way we looked. Pale, rigid, eyes wide with worry. We told her everything in a rush, and she immediately insisted we get into her car. She drove us to Starbucks to help us calm down, and for a moment it worked. The warm lights, the smell of coffee, the familiar chatter, it felt like safety. She eventually drove us back home and waited until we were locked inside before pulling away. But 3 minutes after she left, there was another knock. I didn't even think this time. I just assumed my aunt had forgotten something and opened the door, but it wasn't her. This time it was a man, huge, broad-shouldered, and towering. He must have been at least 6'4" and looked like he could throw both me and my sister across the room without breaking a sweat. His tone was calm but insistent. He asked for the same man the woman had asked for. I told him again that no one by that name lived here. Like the woman before him, he stared down at the screen door handle, as if waiting for me to open it. I didn't. I closed the door slowly, locked it again, and backed away. We watched from behind the blinds as the man walked down the driveway, straight into the middle of the street, where he met up with the same woman from earlier. They stood there talking in hushed tones for several minutes before walking back to their car, which, oddly, was parked 2 houses down and across the street. There had been plenty of space in front of our house. Why had they parked so far away? Why were they asking about someone who didn't live here? Why did they seem so expectant, as though they anticipated being let inside? The whole encounter felt rehearsed, calculated, wrong. My sister and I checked all the locks again. We closed every curtain. We brought the dog inside and waited for our family to come home. When they finally returned, we told them everything in detail. They were disturbed, but not shocked. In fact, our stepdad had a theory, one that chilled us more than the encounter itself. He believed that whoever lived in the house before us might have been involved in something illegal, possibly drugs, possibly debt. These weren't random visitors. They were people with a purpose, showing up with coordinated timing. looking for someone they thought still lived here. Maybe they were connected to something that had nothing to do with us. But we had stepped into the aftermath of it, just by living in the same space, and that thought stayed with us, long after the knocks stopped. Strange things kept happening though. Not every day, not every week, but often enough to keep our nerves on edge. People would walk slowly past our home, looking a little too long at the windows. Cars would idle at the end of the driveway and then leave. Once, someone left an empty manila envelope on the front step. No name, no note, just silence. We never opened it. We didn't want to know. My sister and I became hyper-vigilant. Every sound, every knock, every passing car, our hearts would leap. It was exhausting, never knowing if someone might try the door again, never knowing who else had our address written down on some forgotten piece of paper. It's been 4 years since we moved in. Things have quieted down somewhat, but the unease never really left. We never found out who the man and woman were. They never came back. But we've had others. Strangers asking strange questions, lingering outside a little too long. Maybe it's just coincidence. Or maybe people like that don't forget an address. Whatever the case, it taught us something important. Safety isn't just about locking your doors. It's about awareness. About knowing that sometimes you inherit more than just a house. You inherit stories, secrets, ghosts, not the kind that float, but the kind that knock on your door and ask for people who no longer exist. We still live here for now, but we trust our instincts more than we used to. We pause before opening the door. We check the street before pulling in. And we always remember that no matter how quiet a neighborhood seems, you never really know who's watching or what they might be looking for. Story 6. The caller who found us anyway. It began on what should have been an ordinary, joyful day, the last day of school before summer break in 2016. My mother, brother, stepdad, and I had packed up for a long drive to the south of France, planning to stay at my stepdad's vacation home for a few days of sunshine and relaxation. We were cheerful, joking in the car, playing games like naming animals that began with the last letter of the previous one. It felt carefree, one of those rare trips where the family seemed completely in sync. We had been driving for about 5 hours when we stopped at a roadside rest area, a busy parking lot filled with other travelers and tourists grabbing food and stretching their legs. That was when my mother's phone rang. It was an unknown number, and when she answered, she looked confused. The woman on the other end spoke French, a language we didn't use in our daily life, and introduced herself as someone who had a present for my mom. She claimed to have gone to our old address, the house we'd lived in 2 moves ago, only to be told by the new owners that we no longer lived there. Somehow she had gotten my mother's phone number and now wanted to know our current address to deliver the mysterious present. I watched the colour slowly drain from my mum's face as she realised she'd casually given our address away mid-conversation, caught off guard by the woman's calm voice and vague story. When she ended the call and told us what had happened, the mood in the car shifted. Questions came rushing in. Why would someone need to hand-deliver a gift? Why did they try the house we hadn't lived in for years? How did they even get my mum's number? And why were they speaking French? As my mum explained, her voice grew more distant, more uncertain, and by the end, we were all quiet. The cheerful music and road trip games had stopped. A strange heaviness filled the car, and even though we were hundreds of kilometers away from our home, we felt as though someone was close behind us. When we stopped again for my mom to charge her phone, she decided to call the current owners of our old house, just to confirm the story. They answered, a bit surprised, and said yes, just hours earlier, a woman had indeed come by, asking for my mom. They remembered her, because she wasn't dressed like a delivery driver, and wasn't carrying anything that looked like a package. She was in her late 40s, well-spoken, and oddly calm. No uniform, no badge, no logo on her vehicle, just a stranger looking for a family that no longer lived there. They also insisted they hadn't given her my mom's number, which made us all shiver. That meant she already had it. Back in the car, the tension was thick. My stepdad called a neighbor and asked him to check our property, which was situated alone on top of a small hill, making it easy to overlook or target. It was getting dark by then. and he said he'd circle the house a few times and let us know if he saw anything. Meanwhile, my mum contacted a close family friend to do the same, someone she trusted deeply. Both our neighbour and our friend eventually crossed paths on the property and scared each other half to death before realizing. They were both sent to investigate, but they found nothing. No signs of anyone lurking around. No lights turned on. No windows broken. For the moment, it seemed safe. But the next message made our stomachs drop. Our neighbour's son was a police officer, and once he heard the story, he agreed to have a few patrol cars drive by our house through the night. Hours passed. We tried to focus on the road, tried to enjoy the rest of the trip, but the mood was gone. Every mile felt like we were getting further from answers, but closer to something that didn't feel right. Then, around 11:30 p.m, we got another update. The police had seen a car drive slowly up the private road leading to our home. No one got out. The headlights stayed on. Then the car backed out and drove away, just like that. No knock, no package, no message. The patrols kept watch the rest of the night. No one returned. We reached our destination, but the joy we had carried with us at the beginning of the journey was gone. The house in the south of France felt cold and unfamiliar now, no matter how beautiful the scenery was. My mom couldn't sleep that night, and neither could I. We kept checking our phones, waiting for another call, but it never came. The woman didn't show up again. No packages were ever delivered. No apologies or explanations were sent. It was as if she had vanished, satisfied with just knowing where we lived, even if she never used that information again. After we returned home, we moved out within the year. Not directly because of the incident, but it certainly added urgency to our decision. The thought that someone might have been watching, waiting, or worse, planning something, was impossible to shake. We changed numbers, double-checked locks, and grew more cautious with every interaction. We never figured out how she got my mother's phone number, or why she was trying to reach us in the first place. A present? For what? From whom? And why did it all feel so rehearsed, so intrusive, yet so deliberately vague? Sometimes, I think it could have been worse. Maybe it was a scam. Maybe it was someone looking to exploit an old connection, hoping for a slip of information. Or maybe, and this is the one that keeps me up at night, it was personal. Not random, not accidental. Someone who knew us, or thought they did. Someone who had been watching, waiting for the right moment. The moment we were far enough away that they could act without fear of interruption. The moment our house sat alone at night, quiet and unprotected. The moment they could drive up and just look, or worse. Even now, when I get a call from an unknown number, I hesitate. I let it go to voicemail. I don't answer the door unless I know who's on the other side. I don't assume safety anymore, because safety is something you feel until it's taken from you. That trip was supposed to be about freedom and celebration, but instead, it reminded us how fragile those feelings really are. One call, one question, one wrong word, and suddenly someone is standing outside your home asking for you by name, and you may never know what they truly wanted. Story 7. Whispers in the care home. There's a certain kind of quiet that doesn't bring peace. A silence so heavy it seems to press against your skin, to crawl just behind your ears, humming low and persistent, like a breath that never came from a living thing. That's what the ground floor of the care home felt like to me. I work nights in a very high-end care facility. Luxurious, really, costing families an immense amount, just to house their loved ones in elegant suites with polished wood and pristine linens. 2 floors, 4 suites on each, long hallways with soft lighting, and the scent of antiseptic masked by lavender. You'd think it would feel safe, maybe even comforting, but it wasn't. Not always, especially not at night. And definitely not when you were assigned to work the lower floor, alone. On this particular shift I was downstairs, tasked with cleaning the kitchen inside one of the suites. The cleaners can't be in there during the day due to the risk of cross-contamination, so it's left to us night staff. I had my back to the door, placing cutlery into drawers, the rhythmic clinks echoing faintly. That's when I felt it, an unmistakable sensation, as though someone was standing behind me, not watching from across the room, but close, right behind me. I froze. I waited for the sound of my coworker entering, but when I turned, I saw nothing. No one. Just the dim dining room, the hallway beyond dark still. But something had been there. I felt it. Even the fabric of my uniform had shifted, as if someone had gently brushed against me in passing. I tried to brush it off, to return to my task and keep moving. But the rest of my time in that kitchen felt like walking through water. Thick. Oppressive. I was being watched, I was certain of it. It wasn't fear exactly, but a mounting pressure, as though the walls themselves wanted me out. Later that night, in a different suite, I was cleaning again. Same position. Back to the door, trying to work quickly and keep my mind from spiraling. That's when I heard it. A whistle. Clear and melodic. A nursery rhyme I couldn't quite place, echoing from the hallway. It wasn't faint or far away. It was just beyond the door. A childlike whistle in a building where every resident was elderly. Every guest was long gone, and every patient was asleep. My first instinct was to check the alarm system. No one had gotten out of bed. No doors had opened. My coworker was outside having a smoke, nowhere near the corridor. I was alone on that end of the floor, completely alone. And yet there it was again, soft and deliberate, like someone playing with me, daring me to step into the dark. I didn't. I stayed frozen in the dining room, my heart pounding. Her expression shifted immediately. She said she had. The whistling, the feeling of being followed, the sense that sometimes she wasn't the only one down there. She told me the daytime staff had whispered about it too. They laughed it off in daylight, but none of them liked staying past sunset. There was something about that wing, an energy, a presence. Nothing overt, nothing dangerous, just persistent. I tried not to let it get to me. But over the weeks that followed, the sensations continued. I'd be sweeping and hear footsteps behind me. I'd be restocking supplies and feel a hand brush my shoulder. Always soft. Always brief. Never anything visible. It was like being haunted by the idea of someone rather than a full apparition. Like memory was living in the walls, breathing through the air vents, watching through the light fixtures. The worst moments always happened between midnight and 3 in the morning. That's when the air got thick, when time seemed to slow, when the temperature dropped just enough to notice. I started timing my cleaning differently, getting in and out of certain areas quickly, avoiding specific rooms until my coworker was nearby. It wasn't just paranoia. I could feel it. Something was there. Not all the time, but enough. Enough to change how I walked. Enough to make me whisper apologies into empty rooms, just in case. I still remember one night, standing in the kitchenette, waiting for the kettle to boil, when I caught a glimpse of movement in the reflection of a glass cabinet. A small figure, childlike, darting just out of sight. I turned quickly, but there was nothing. Just the glow of the nightlight and the humming fridge. But I know what I saw. Or rather, I know what I didn't see but should have. That absence of explanation is what lingers. You begin to trust your senses differently when you work night shifts in a place like this. You stop asking, did that really happen? And start asking, what does it want? Or, more frighteningly, what did it used to be? Because that's what haunts a place like this. Not just the dying, but the echoes of the already gone. The ones who don't realize they've left. Or the ones who refuse to. I started journaling during breaks, trying to make sense of the feelings. I wrote down times, places, sensations, dreams. It helped a little. At first. Gave me a sense of control. But over time, the entries began to feel repetitive, as if I wasn't writing from memory, but being fed the words, like the building itself was trying to tell me something. I told myself I was imagining it. Stress, lack of sleep, but deep down I knew. You don't feel watched like that by nothing. You don't feel your skin crawl for no reason. You don't flinch at whistles unless something in you recognizes a presence, even if your eyes can't. Now I always approach the ground floor with respect. I greet the silence. I acknowledge the shadows. I keep my voice low. And I never joke about what I felt, because I think the place listens. And if it does, I want it to know that I see it. That I don't mean harm. That I'm just passing through. Maybe it's nothing. Or maybe it's the residue of lives once lived. Moments replaying themselves over and over. But either way, I've learned something valuable in that care home. Not all ghosts make noise. Some of them whisper. Some of them hum lullabies in the dark. And some of them just want to be seen. Story 8. The silent voicemails. There's something uniquely unsettling about receiving a message meant to reach you, yet filled with silence. I was around 12 or 13 when it began. Just an ordinary student walking home from school when I noticed the blinking notification on my phone. I had a voicemail. That alone was odd. I never received voicemails. Curious, I pressed play as I wandered down the familiar streets. What greeted me was nothing. Not static, not background noise. Just the sense of someone holding the phone, breathing faintly, waiting. I assumed it was a butt dial or an accidental call and deleted it without much thought. But then it happened again the next day. And the day after that. Each time a new voicemail. Each time the same eerie silence. At first I chalked it up to a prank. Maybe someone at school had gotten hold of my number and was trying to freak me out. I laughed it off with friends, pretending I wasn't bothered. But deep down, a pit of unease had started to form. Each voicemail felt heavier than the last, as if something was building. The silence began to stretch longer, and I started catching faint sounds buried deep within the quiet breathing, maybe, or the shuffle of movement. Once or twice, I thought I heard someone sigh. Still there were no words, just a presence, a breath, a space that should not have been filled. Weeks passed. The voicemails continued. I began to dread the walk home, dread seeing the notification. Sometimes I'd get multiple messages in a single afternoon, 6, 7, even 8 in a row. I would listen to the first few seconds of each before deleting them, but they always felt the same, intentional, waiting. One night, after what had become my usual routine of deleting voicemails, a different one came through. This time there was no silence, no breathing, just a voice. A man, angry, screaming insults, his words cutting and fast, his tone furious. I froze. My heart pounded. I couldn't breathe. He didn't say my name, but it felt directed at me, like he knew who I was, what I had done, and yet I hadn't done anything. That was the scariest part. I told no one. I was embarrassed. I felt stupid. What if I was overreacting? What if it was just a random lunatic who had somehow gotten the wrong number? But the messages kept coming. And they weren't silent anymore. The man's voice returned, louder, crueler, more direct. And then one day, he said something that shattered my world. "I'm coming to get you." It wasn't screamed. It was whispered, cold, precise, meant to be heard. I dropped my phone. My hands trembled as I picked it up again, deleting the message so quickly it felt like I could wipe the voice from reality. But the fear remained. I sat in my room with my back to the door, certain someone was about to kick it open. I didn't sleep that night. Eventually, I ran to my parents, asking them to help me change my phone number. I didn't give them all the details, just said I was getting strange messages and needed it gone. They agreed, assuming it was some school prank or technical error. I felt a bit safer after that, thinking I had finally cut the cord. The silence returned, but this time it brought comfort. No voicemails, no messages, just quiet. For a few days it was like a spell had been broken. I ventured outside again. I smiled more. Until the train ride. It was a weekend. I decided to meet up with friends at our usual hangout. I got on the train, dressed in my usual style, heavy makeup, teased hair, the unmistakable look of a goth kid in a sea of everyday faces. That's when I saw him. A man. He entered the carriage at the far end and walked the full length of it just to sit beside me. He smiled and said he liked my style. There was something about him that felt familiar, too familiar. I couldn't place it, but I knew him. Or rather, I knew the way he made me feel. Uncomfortable. Exposed. Like he already knew the ending to a story I hadn't written yet. He began asking questions. How old was I? Where did I go to school? Did I have a boyfriend? I gave vague answers, or outright lies, but he didn't seem to need them. He answered for me. You're 13, right? You go to this school. You live in that area. My blood ran cold. I stopped making eye contact. But every time I looked away, he moved his face into my line of vision. He bent low, tilted his head. His eyes were sharp, knowing. I don't remember everything he said. My brain has blurred some of it out. A defensive measure, perhaps. But I remember his last words. There's a party at the library. Want to come? I shook my head. He left, got off at the next stop. But I later found out that near that library was an alley known for being dangerous, a place people avoided, even during the day. I never saw him again. But I wasn't done with the story. Months passed, and someone started a trend online, Googling their old usernames to see what would pop up. Out of curiosity, I did the same. Most results were random and harmless, but one image caught my eye. A photo of me, one I hadn't posted anywhere public. I clicked on the image. It led to an old obscure website. There was no page content, just a single download link. It was labeled map. I didn't download it. I couldn't. My heart was racing, and my mind screamed for me to close the browser, and I did. But that's what haunts me still. The file. The map. What was it mapping? My location? My movements? My routines? I'll never know. But that one word has echoed in my mind ever since. That, and the realization that someone had been watching me long before I realized it. Watching me long enough to gather photos, details, maybe even locations. I was just a kid, but that didn't matter. To him, I had already become part of something I never agreed to be in. In the end, I was homeschooled for a while after that. It helped. Gave me space, safety, time. But I never felt the same sense of freedom again. I still don't. And I've learned to listen more carefully to the quiet. Because sometimes silence is a mask. Sometimes it's a hook. And sometimes it's just waiting for you to pick up. Story 9. The man on the back roads. There's something about back roads at night that always made me uneasy, even before I had a reason to feel that way. Maybe it's the way the trees lean just a little too close, or how the moonlight seems to vanish the second you leave the main highway. But on that particular night, I didn't have much of a choice. I had dropped my friend off at her house a few towns over and decided to take the scenic route home. It was quiet, peaceful, and something I had done many times before without issue. But this time was different. This time I wasn't alone. It was past midnight, the road stretching endlessly ahead, winding like a ribbon through the woods. My headlights were the only source of illumination, carving tunnels of light through the dark. I had music playing softly, the kind that helps pass time without distracting too much. I was maybe 20 minutes from home when I noticed something strange. A figure standing on the side of the road, just outside the reach of my high beams. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker, but as I got closer, I realized the man wasn't signaling for help. He wasn't moving at all. He stood still, facing the road, his head turned slightly toward my approaching car. There was something unnatural about the way he stood. His arms were too stiff, his posture too perfect, as if he were waiting, watching. I slowed down, not to stop, but to pass more carefully. As I drove past, I glanced at his face. He was pale, his features partially obscured by the brim of a wide hat. But what struck me most was his expression, or lack of one. Blank, emotionless, yet deeply focused, like he was memorizing me. I kept driving to share the unease, chalking it up to some stranger who had maybe gotten lost or was waiting for a ride. But a few miles later, I saw him again, this time on the other side of the road, standing the exact same way, same clothes, same hat, same stillness. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't slow down this time. I stared ahead, refusing to look at him as I passed. Even though I could feel his gaze tracking me, I hit the gas, heart pounding, trying to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe it was a different person. Maybe there were two of them. Twins, playing a prank. Anything to make sense of it. But deep down I knew it was the same man, and he had gotten ahead of me without a car, without passing me, without making a sound. I locked my doors and turned up the music, trying to drown out the rising panic. The road twisted sharply, then leveled out into a long straightaway. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see headlights or a figure chasing me on foot, but nothing came. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I knew these roads. I had driven them for years, but now they felt unfamiliar. The turns sharper, the woods darker, the mile markers missing, as if the landscape itself had shifted behind me, trapping me in a loop. Then my phone lost signal. Completely dead. No bars, no GPS, just a black screen and the steady beat of my own heartbeat in my ears. I thought about turning around, but the idea of facing the man again, passing him for a third time, was too much. I pressed on, gripping the wheel tighter, and that's when I saw the third version of him. This time, he was standing in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes. Tires screeched, the car fishtailing slightly before coming to a halt. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, face tilted slightly toward me, as if he were waiting for something, some decision, some acknowledgement. I refused to open the window. I refused to speak. I just sat there, shaking, staring at him through the windshield, and then he took a single step forward. That was enough. I reversed the car hard, tires spinning, gravel flying. I turned around the way I came, heading back down the road as fast as I could. The woods blurred past me, every tree a blur of black and grey. I didn't slow down until I hit the first intersection I recognized. The second, I saw streetlights and paved sidewalks. I pulled into a gas station and parked under the brightest floodlight I find. I stayed there for almost an hour. No one followed. No strange figures. No shadowed man with a brimmed hat. Eventually, my phone signal returned, and I called my dad. I didn't tell him the whole story, just that I'd gotten lost and didn't feel safe. He told me to wait there, and he came to get me. I never took that road again. Not at night. Not alone. I tried to research the area, to see if anyone else had experienced anything similar. I found scattered reports, people claiming to see a man in the woods, on the roads, appearing in multiple places at once. Some called him an omen, others a warning, but none had a clear explanation. I don't know who or what I saw that night, but I know it wasn't normal. It wasn't right. And it changed how I think about the places we assume are familiar, because sometimes the road home takes you somewhere else entirely, somewhere that watches you back,